B.Scott from Hiram Clark. B.Scott from Hiram.
Welcome to the B Block Podcast. I am your host, Brandon Scott. I appreciate you for rejoining me, I should say. It has been a while since we chatted. I got a lot of things to go over, really in a short amount of time. I don't want to make this a terribly long episode, but we do have a lot to go over, and I'm excited to do it, honestly. I don't want to feel like or make it seem like I'm trying to rush through this. There is just not as much time as I would like. But I did want to get with y'all because there's a few things I wanted to touch on. We got some show announcements that I'll get to a little bit later on in this episode. And of course, some takeaways from Texans training camp, Texans preseason. We just had joint practice, I should say, with the Los Angeles Rams. And this should drop roughly 24 hours before their preseason game against the Rams at NRG Stadium, which I'm not expecting a whole lot from. Probably going to get a lot more out of that practice than out of the game, but we'll talk about those things in just a moment. In the meantime, I do want you, if you're not already, to subscribe to the B Block Podcast wherever it is that you get your podcast, whether that's Apple, Spotify, wherever it is, Google, wherever you find your podcast, you should be able to find us. So I want you to do that. Leave a review, rate it. All of those things really help with the podcast. So I really appreciate that. And of course, on YouTube, you can subscribe. The B Block Podcast, Brandon Scott on YouTube. We will be dropping episodes continually on that channel. Before I get to the Texan stuff and the show announcements that I definitely want to tackle here in this episode, though, I do want to talk about this Steve McNair documentary that came out, because this one was a little personal for me. And honestly, it's just something that I was looking forward to when I heard that Netflix was doing it. Now, I don't think I was totally clear on it being part of their Untold series, which I think has been hit or miss. And if I had known that, maybe I would have gone into it, or if I realized that, I probably would have gone into it with lesser expectations. But for the expectations that I went into it with, thinking that somehow this documentary was going to move this story forward, or that it would be revealing, or that we would learn something about this Steve McNair case that we did not know, that we haven't learned over the past 15 years since he was killed in an apartment out there in Nashville, Tennessee. Like I was thinking that we would get that. Maybe if I had realized it would be part of this Untold series, I'd realize that it would be more of a rehash, a nicely presented rehash of things that we basically already know, which is what I found a lot of these Netflix Untold. I like a lot of the things that Netflix is doing sports-wise right now, but the Untold series leaves a little bit to, I would say a lot, to be desired. So I want to go over this quickly because there were some things about it. Obviously, overall, I would say it disappointed, but there were also some things about it that were nostalgic and reminders for me of certain things that were cool from my childhood, growing up as a Houston sports fan. The Houston Oilers move, first of all, them drafting Steve McNair to begin with, and then their move from Houston to Tennessee, and how I sort of took that in or digested that at the time as a young person, as a child, really, versus how adults did, and also Houston sports fans who are older than me that are able to remember that time period. There's a gap there, or a difference there in how we consume that and how we remember, how we reflect on all of that. And I think it also affects the way we look at, or perhaps with the way we used to look at, the rivalry with Tennessee, with the Titans. But I'll get into that in just a second. It disappointed, though, because there is a narrative podcast, an investigative / narrative podcast done by Sports Illustrated, I believe, that is called Fall of a Titan. I want to look that up, make sure that I have that correct. Fall of the Titan, is it? That actually goes through the Steve McNair. Yeah, Fall of a Titan. And it came out several years back. And it provides all of the information that you get in this documentary, and probably even more, like more commentary from Steve McNair's family and people that were close to him. Jenny Kasimi, if I'm saying that correctly, the woman who was found dead with him and believed to be the murder aspect to the murder suicide. And I hate that this is happening, that I'm trying to multitask in the middle of this. But either way, those things were part of that podcast that I thought were noteworthy and like things that we could maybe build on, find out a little bit more information about whether this is a case that could be reopened, because there was a serious question with this case as to whether the woman found dead with Steve McNair in this murder suicide actually did the murder suicide. Like there was motive and there were potential suspects that just were not looked at with the depth that you would expect a potential murder suspect to be looked at, especially in an incident that involves somebody as high profile as Steve McNair. So there are at least 2 to 3 other people that it felt like deserved a closer eye on this case based off of the podcast that SI did. Again, that one is called Fall of a Titan. This documentary that Netflix did, it's Untold, as part of its Untold series, touched on some of that, but did not go in depth with that at all. And that was the big disappointment from the documentary. I would say if you want a more in-depth look at that case, that Fall of a Titan is definitely the way to go. Another disappointing part about it, and I guess this is something that had to happen to kind of make it more palatable sports wise, but there was a lot of the back and forth timeline of Steve McNair, the football player, and the murder, which I think is part of what took away from their ability to dive deeper into the bigger question. I think for most people, we know and realize and could have done maybe 5 minutes at the most on Steve McNair, the football player, because that is the story that most people know, and obviously would have been worth revisiting to contextualize why we're even talking about this, why this name rings out the way that it does. But there was far too much of the look back at the football element of this story that really didn't quite connect with exactly what was going on in the case, or I should say the questions that are left unanswered and are much more interesting to dive into than rehashing his career and, quite frankly, rehashing a lot of the stuff that's already been reported out there, man. So I would have liked to have seen a lot more focus on what actually happened to Steve McNair, the failures of the police to probably give this the proper look and eye that an investigation that it deserved, which is certainly the way it felt from that podcast. And if you look at all of the that's out there and the other people that could have been involved in this case, he was estranged with his wife. He had a friend, a really close friend that he played college ball with that was part of his inner circle, and they did business together. And they had just had like a $13,000 dispute between the two of them, like just weeks before this killing happened. And that ended up being the person that called 911. Oh, and by the way, that person was not the guy that discovered the bodies first. Somebody discovered the bodies, then called this person who has a $13,000 dispute with him. And then they call the police or 911 to say that these bodies are here. Like they're the person that supposedly sold the woman the gun. Like there is a lot of meat on the bone that I feel like this Netflix documentary just neglected to chew on, and I don't understand it. It was a massive disappointment for me because I was going into this thing thinking I was going to really learn something, thinking it was going to be really something revealing, and man, it was not. Boy, was it not. So that's the disappointing part. The part that was cool though for me was, and I know I said there was too much of this, the revisiting of the career, but I am glad that they at least did it. I just thought they maybe spent a little bit too much time on it, but I'm glad that they at least did it because it was a reminder for me of why I viewed, even though Steve McNair was a Tennessee Titan and, he won an MVP as a Tennessee Titan, went to the Super Bowl as a Tennessee Titan, and is remembered as a Tennessee Titan, not a Houston Oiler, even though he was drafted by the Houston Oilers and technically played for the Oilers sparingly, but technically played for the Oilers for his first 2 seasons. He is the crossover, the passing of the torch from the Houston Oilers to the Tennessee Titans. But in my mind, even though he is a Tennessee Titan, in my mind remains a Houston Oiler. And it's for some personal reasons. And it might even contribute to like me not viewing the Titans up until recently with the same type of venom or outrage or hatred that maybe an outsider would expect. And honestly, again, some of the older Houston sports fans that do have all of the context of the league, the move, why they left, the politics behind it, the nastiness behind it. I didn't have that as a child. It was more sadness than anger for me having the Oilers leave because I did not understand all of the details around it. I just knew that the football team was leaving. And then eventually the football team was calling itself something else and that there was no local football here. You had to watch the Cowboys or whatever was on nationally, but that felt there was an emptiness and a sadness that came with that for me, for the age I was and where I was mentally. But what the doc did do, I thought, was a decent job of revisiting what Steve McNair meant at the time he entered the league, how he was kind of this folk hero. And people who were around for this know this and remember this, but he was like a folk hero. He had this mystique about him in college at Alcorn State, and it was like appointment viewing when he played football, when he played college football. And then him being drafted by the Oilers, number 3 overall at the time. And I remember this, but it's been a long time. I remember this and know this, but it's been a long time since I thought much about it. But at the time, Steve McNair was the highest drafted African-American quarterback in the NFL. And that 100% mattered. And for that to be happening in Houston, even with all of the issues that the Oilers were going through at the time, the attendance issues, the stadium issues, Bud Adams' political fight with, local officials and the Astros and all of that, everything that was going on at the time, drafting the first African American or the highest drafted African American quarterback to the Houston football franchise at a time where that was just that simply was not. I mean, obviously it was the first one, so it obviously was not a big thing that people did or that teams did. And then for him to also come from an HBCU, like to come from an HBCU and to and to carry the sort of this cachet of, the highest drafted black quarterback and all of that is, I thought, significant. Bottom line, I've got no love for the Tennessee Titans, no love for that organization at all. I don't respect what they represent, what the Adams family represents. A lot of their fans, I think, tend to be agitators and like purposely dishonest, and I think they take direction. And this is not all of them, of course, but a good portion of the ones that I've had the pleasure of interacting with, I feel like take a lot of their unpleasant demeanor and direction from ownership and the organization that they are a fan of. And so together, I do not like the Titans or really anything about them. But the Steve McNair documentary, for however disappointing that it is, just his history and the facts around Steve McNair in the beginning of his career show why I did not always hate the Titans and why at one point, again, since I was too young to really understand and appreciate the politics and the backstabbing nature of the team leaving Houston. I just did not have that. He represents for me why I at one point did not hate the Titans and in fact did root for them. Like I was rooting for them in that Super Bowl. I was rooting for them in those weird, awkward years where they were the Tennessee Oilers, and that didn't really make a lot of sense because I still felt connected to that. I still felt sad that that was not here, and also did not have the level of awareness to feel betrayed the way the older fans or the more, I guess, aware and understanding fans felt at that time. So Steve McNair and Eddie George, and I'm leaving out a few names of guys who represent that transition or who are part of that transition from Oilers to Titans, from Houston to Tennessee. Those guys specifically, because they were young stars on that team at that time, those guys for me are like the connective tissue of Houston pro football, like going from the awkwardness of Oilers to Titans to the birth of the Houston Texans. Like those two guys are considered Titans, but in my mind and for where I was at that time, I did still associate them with Oilers or as Oilers. And so again, I get why that is very specific to me, or might be specific to somebody that's in a similar situation or was consuming sports in a similar way as I was at that time. But that's what I see. Like my distaste and hate for the Titans today is not reflective of my feelings about guys like Steve McNair and Eddie George, and vice versa, if that makes sense. Right? Like I'm a fan of Steve McNair. Associate him with Houston as being the highest at the time drafted black quarterback by an NFL franchise, and that being in Houston. Like that matters to me. Eddie George, I remember him vaguely as an Oiler. In my mind, he's an Oiler, even though he's really a Titan or mostly a Titan. So like I'm a fan of those cats, or a fan of their careers, in a way that I am not a fan of the franchise that they represent. So there is like an awkward transition of, for me specifically, an awkward transition of like liking the Titans and then hating the Titans when you fast forward 20 plus years later. So that is that was reminded, or a reminder to me from watching that documentary, that I wasn't expecting to hit home, because again, I was expecting them to reveal something about the case, the thing that I thought we were here for, not all of this romanticizing of the football past, but deep down I was glad that they did it, because I did get to sort of relive that moment. I know that Sean Pendergast, my coworker and friend over at Sports Radio 610, did a poll not that long ago asking the audience about which team in the AFC South they hated the most. And if he had asked that question a year or two ago, it would have been a no-brainer. And forever, it's been a no-brainer as a Texans fan that the team you hated the most had to be the Colts, because they were always the biggest threat. They were the most successful. They were kind of the class of the division and have been for a very long time. And so for me, that's been it. And again, had this deep down conflict with the Titans, where at a time, because of who was there and because of where they were coming from, I did actually care for them, and so I didn't view them in the same way that I viewed the Colts, as a straight up like, hey, this is a team that we've got to overcome to be something. I viewed the Titans as like, really like the ex-girlfriend, and it, for me, it did not end as poorly, or I did not understand that it ended as poorly as it did. So, but the point is, the answer to that question is completely different today as it would have been, say, a couple of years ago, after you get the uniforms fiasco with the Titans and wearing the Oilers uniforms after all of those years of not really seeming to care much about the Oilers, or tapping into that history of wearing the uniforms. Like, it's not something that they've always done. They just decided to start doing all of a sudden. Like, they purposefully went away from the Oilers history to create a new history with the Titans, and they left Houston unceremoniously. So like to be, it felt a bit disingenuous and continues to feel a bit disingenuous. But when you look at how things played out over the last year with it, how they tried to rub it into the face of the Texans, and then they even show some hate against U of H for trying to tap into it, right? For trying to tap into the love you blue colors, which don't have nothing to do with the Titans, or shouldn't offend them at all. Seem completely unnecessary for them to send that cease and desist to U of H, and like added fuel to the flames, and the way that their fans responded to the distaste from the Houston fans, not understanding where a lot of us were coming from and trying to rub it in and agitate. Like it's the Titans all the way now. Like we are. I think I said this on X/Twitter not that long ago. Like we are at war with the Titans, and just again everything that they represent. Not down for it, not with it. But at the Steve McNair era Titans, for me, still felt like Oilers. Still felt like Oilers. Now, some points about the Texans that I want to make as we go into this final preseason game. And by the time you watch this, who knows, or watch or hear this, who knows, the game might already be happening. But these are some overall takeaways for me from, obviously covering all of training camp and being in most of these practices, and at the very least, knowing the people who are there. When I'm not there, everybody who is there are people that I have access to, right? So I'm really close to this, and plan on covering this season pretty closely here on the B Block podcast. More on that in a little bit. But I want to start with Kamari Lassiter. I feel like the Texans have something special in Kamari Lassiter. I love how we went from when he was drafted, you had the questions about his 40 time and whether he'd be a slot corner. Is he somebody who's got the speed to play outside? What does the tape tell you? Does the tape at Georgia translate to the NFL? How long did he really have to cover at Georgia when he had all of those defensive linemen and all of those like pro defensive players playing alongside him? Like how can you evaluate him, or how does this game translate when, he's not surrounded by all of this supreme talent for the level that they're on, if this is what his speed looks like? And man, those questions feel like they've been asked and answered, at least from a practice standpoint, from a training camp standpoint, the reps that you're able to see him get in practice, who he goes up against in practicing. The one part, or I should say the other side of that, hey, this Texans wide receiving group is one of the best in the league, and man, their passing game is going to be amazing. They're going to kill it out there. Well, the other side of that, or a more training camp specific angle on that, is how their secondary, the Texans secondary, will be tested about as well as anybody could be tested. They'll go up against as good of a receiving core as they will find even in real games. Like they'll actually practice against guys that are probably better than most of the groups that they're going to go up against in real time. So Kamari Lassiter, you want to talk about a baptism. You want to talk about just being just thrown into it. He's got reps against Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell, Nico Collins, like Noah Brown, the depth of guys that they've got who have played high-level football. And Kamari Lassiter goes out there and just looks like he belongs. Looks like he belongs. He said this not that long ago, I think it was this week, that rookie is just a word to him. He was brought here to do a job, and he plays like that. They talk about him like he's like that. Like this doesn't feel like just feels like another really good player on the team who just happens to be a rookie. So I think they have something special in Kamari Lassiter. We have gone from those questions that I mentioned earlier to like, man, he feels like a legit starter in this league. And for me, it's changed the view. It has changed the view of that room in terms of its depth. Like I thought, hey, Derek Stingley, hopefully dude stays healthy. But if he's not healthy, I got some serious questions about the depth of that position. Who's cornerback number one? Is that a rookie? Is that a retread, a failed high draft pick? One of these guys that they brought in is one of those guys supposed to be cornerback number one if Derek Stingley goes down, which we know is a valid concern, something that could legitimately happen. Like I was concerned about that going into training camp. I am far less concerned about that today. Like if something happens to Derek Stingley, and knock on wood, hopefully nothing does. Hopefully this is the year for him to finally put it all together in terms of having a mostly healthy season where he can play enough games to be recognized as the type of talent that he is. But if for some reason he's got to miss time and Kamari Lassiter has to go on the best guy, has to go and guard the best guy, I feel a lot better about that. And then to the depth of the rest of the guys, like, or the rest of the position group, right? Like who's CB2 if Kamari Lassiter has to step up for Derek Stingley, and Jeff Okudah and CJ Henderson and Boyd and just the Mike Ford. Like I'm not saying that I love that look, but I feel a lot better about the floor of the cornerback room, if that makes sense. Like to me, Kamari Lassiter, one of the greatest things that he's done so far is raise the floor of that position group. He's going to start opposite Derek Stingley, but also the floor of what you can expect from them, to me, is much higher than it was probably going in when you weren't exactly sure what you were going to get from dude. So excited about that. That is a huge thing for the Texans. Now, the running game. Okay, this is a big thing. This is a big thing because this could very well still turn out to be a one-dimensional football team. I don't think that's going to happen because Joe Mixon is just that much better than anything that they've had in a long time at that position. And I think that the interior offensive line, which is another big story going into this training camp, looks pretty good. But for some reason, the running game still feels like it needs a lot of work. We haven't seen a ton of Joe Mixon, but from what we've seen from Dameon Pierce, like that is obviously an issue. Now, the other running backs behind different offensive lines have been able to make things happen, but it's hard to feel great about the running game, which is really confusing because you would think that one of the higher paid offensive lines in football, and one that does pass protect as well as it does and is as physically gifted as this one is, should be able to run block. So like that is a concern, remains a concern for me. I don't know what's going to happen between now and them actually playing Indy in week 1. What exactly is going to happen for me to change that feeling? But I brought this up on the drive a couple of days ago. Like, is the concerns with the run game? Is it because these guys aren't actually good run blockers, or is it not coached right? Is it not schemed right? What exactly is the disconnect between the talent that you feel like you have at offensive line, and they're mostly healthy now, right? They're expecting all of those guys to be out there. What's the disconnect between the talent that you have on the offensive line and your ability to scheme up and execute an adequate and respectable run game? They got to answer that question. And to me, that's a Bobby Slowick question. That's a Chris Strausser question, and ultimately a D'Amico Ryans question. I think, I mean, it's really everywhere. It's a team question, but you're looking at those figures specifically and particularly to figure out how you're going to solve this problem. Right. And until you do, I actually am perfectly fine with them being just a pass heavy offense. Like if it's just, hey, put the ball in the hands of CJ Stroud, these guys can pass protect, and let Tank Dell, Stephon Diggs, Nico Collins, Dalton Schultz, even Joe Mixon to a degree, let these cats go out there and win. Noah Brown, let them go out there and win, and that just be the identity of the team. Maybe we only run it to keep them honest or to maintain a certain level of physicality in the game, but not as a real strategy to gain yards or to really even set up down and distance. Like we're just running the ball because you kind of have to. Like you kind of have to. But when we talk about abandoning the run game, I like to think most of the time we're using hyperbole. Like we're just kind of speaking hyperbolic, but we're really saying run it a whole lot less. Don't really abandon it because that's not really a thing, but you need to run it a whole lot less and throw it a whole lot more and stop operating with this illusion that you're going to have a balanced attack or that you have to have a balanced attack in order to be successful. No, you do a specific thing well, and so you need to lean into that thing all the way. Running game still needs work. I got questions about how it's being coached and how it's being schemed, and then ultimately how it's being executed. Everybody's got the side eye right now, or everybody's getting the side eye right now. All of y'all, figure that out. Please figure that out. Now, this one does not take a lot to explain. Stephon Diggs, there were questions about whether he was slowing down. Is he the same? Is he worth them trading for? And, is he worth the headache of maybe disrupting the development of a young emerging quarterback, or a young quarterback who immediately established himself as a star in this league, and CJ Stroud? Like, do you want to bring that in and mess with that? And I was like, man, hell yeah. Hell yeah, I do. And it's because I don't feel like CJ Stroud is some kind of fickle, mentally weak, I can't handle a dominant personality in my offensive meeting rooms or on my sideline. Like, I just think too much of CJ Stroud to feel like Stephon Diggs was ever going to come to this team and ruin dude. I did not see that. And that's aside from not necessarily really knowing about Stephon Diggs at the time, like personally, or having more personal and up close accounts of what he's like to work with. And from what I can understand, first of all, CJ Stroud don't have no issue with dealing with personalities. He's got one himself. And then second of all, Stephon Diggs, I am not convinced is actually on the wrong side of the arguments in history in which he's involved in disputes, right? Like the disputes in Minnesota. I am not entirely sure that Stephon Diggs wasn't on the right side of the argument. The disputes in Buffalo, all the mess that they got going on out there, I am not entirely convinced that Stephon Diggs was on the wrong side of them arguments. Like, I'm just not. I'm sorry. So the fact that he's even had those issues does not really rate as much with me, because I'm not sure that he might have had points. Points might have been made from dude. Like maybe they weren't executing the way that they were. Maybe he was missing them when he was open. Maybe Josh Allen was out there doing some silly stuff, which we know he is prone to do at times, as talented as he is. And let's not forget that he wasn't really about much until Stephon Diggs got there to begin with. Not saying that's the only reason why he's good, but that did happen. So I just don't buy it. Or not that it's not an issue at all, but I don't believe in the way that it's been portrayed, that it's exactly like that. I feel like that's a lot of narrative stuff that we take and we gravitate toward, and then we just run with it. Like, oh, they say it's a problem. He must be a problem. Oh, I saw him be emotional on the sideline. That must be a distraction for the team. Like, nah, he might be emotional on the sideline because there's some bullshit going on, and he tired of it. And I don't have a problem with that, quite frankly. I don't. That's one of those, hey, I need to hear both sides. I need to hear more. I need more information. What exactly happened here? What's the deal? What's my man mad about? That's how I've always felt about that. But as far as on the football field, Stephon Diggs is him. He is that dude. If he missed a step, I ain't seen it. I ain't seen it. Dude catches everything, gets open, is excellent after the catch. Nick Caserio, Texans general manager, has talked about how he is much stronger than he looks, because he's not a physically imposing dude. When you get up on him, he's got the broad shoulders, and he's kind of a rock. He's kind of a rock. And that's being added to a team that already has the best yards after the catch receiver that there is in football. And if you want to make the argument that that's Deebo Samuel, that's fine. I'll allow that. But I think the numbers will tell you that it's Nico Collins. So you got both of those dudes on the team. Whew. Which leads me to my next point. CJ Stroud in year 2, I think, is really about everything around him coming together. I've said before, if he doesn't improve at all and just plays to the level and standard that he did as a rookie, I'm not going to really complain about it. I know the numbers are going to look different. Circumstances are going to be different. He's not going to replicate the season that he had as a rookie, because it's just a different season. His team is different. The teams that they're playing are different. It's just a flat out different season. But I'm expecting him to at least play at the level that he did before, and or like that he did as a rookie. And if he does that, year 2 should be just fine. what would make it even more of a success, never mind the fact that he could improve, that he could actually be better, which is a scary thought. But to me, it's really all about everything around him finally coming together. That run game that I talked about earlier, what's going on? If he's got a run game to work with, I cannot imagine a scenario where this passing game is not one of the better ones in the league. I just can't see it. I cannot see it. So if they are, or if they do dare to have a balanced offense, I just think this is an amazing opportunity for CJ Stroud in year two. When you talk about, MVP possibilities, the possibilities for the team, how deep they can go, how dangerous they can actually be. Can they be a threat to the Kansas City Chiefs? The way that the Bengals were a few years ago. Like, are they on that track? I absolutely feel like they could be or will be if everything around CJ Stroud comes together in a similar way that it did last year, but differently because there's so much around it. Like, it just actually has to come together. The defense, right? I think that's another one where it looks like this defense has a chance to be a lot more opportunistic than it was last year, a lot better at taking the football away than it was last year. I think that's there, that's in play. I do have some issues or some concerns about the depth of it overall. I know I talked about cornerback a moment ago, but the depth of the defense overall is something that I'm not entirely comfortable with. But again, there's so much there at the top end that I am optimistic about. Now, another thing coming out of training camp and coming out of preseason is the fact that Christian Harris and Will Anderson have missed so much time. Christian Harris has barely practiced at all since training camp, came back after missing several weeks, and then was almost immediately out again. He's got a calf injury. And then Will Anderson has had an ankle issue for what seems like almost a year now. Definitely goes back to last season, and now he's missed some significant time out there at practice with the ankle injury. Now, he did post something on Instagram that made it seem like he could be close to being back or whatever, but the overall point there is, how are they dealing with those injuries throughout the season? Especially early on in the season, if they're even playing, right? Like, if they're out there, if they're not out there, those are obvious issues, right? They're not playing. But even if they are playing, they are things that I'm going to be thinking about. Like, is Christian Harris, and like the whole thing about him is how mobile he is for a linebacker. The fact that he is really the only guy on the team that you feel good about covering, right? The only linebacker on the team that you really feel good about his athleticism and his ability to cover and be a factor in the passing game, as part of the passing defense. So if he's limited at all and he doesn't look like the same guy, that's just something I'm gonna be out there looking for with that calf. Something to monitor. Will Anderson Jr., same thing. Both of these guys are dogs, gamers, I know. But if that ankle is limiting him, that is going to be important context when we talk about the kind of season that Will Anderson is having and the impact that he's having on this defense, the impact that Danielle Hunter, that acquisition, has on Will Anderson and the overall pass rush. Because the idea is that you can't double a guy, or that it's going to be hard to make those decisions on who you put extra attention toward. Well, the obvious answer might be Danielle Hunter if Will Anderson, for whatever reason, is not able to be himself. And I'm hoping that he is. Him and Christian Harris, really good football players, really good dudes. But it is a thing, and a thing to be concerned about and worth monitoring. So I will be doing that. I'm looking forward to this game against the Rams, even though I'm not expecting any of the main players to play a lot, if at all. And more than anything, looking forward to getting to the real deal, because we are almost there, almost at the finish line. Let me, before we finish up, give these show announcements. All right. Like I mentioned, it's been a minute since I did the B-Block podcast. I've had a lot going on. I feel like the last time I talked to y'all, I mentioned the changes at ITL and the Loop on Sports Radio 610, which for at least a little while, it seemed like I might be, what's the best way of putting this now that we are where we are? There were auditions for the show, in-house, and there were obviously um, external candidates that were brought in to audition. That job went to Reginald Atatula from previously from 105.3 The Fan, originally from Houston, but has spent a lot of time since, his teenage years, has spent a lot of time in Austin and in the Dallas area. So he's back in Houston. He is the new co-host of In the Loop. Had a chance to chop it up with him quite a bit, or at least met him in person a couple of times. We are now co-workers. I am actually excited about that because I have been familiar with Reginald's work for the last couple of years at The Fan. It's obviously another Odyssey station. So in some ways, he's always been a co-worker or has been one for a long time. But the new schedule with that is it looks like I'm gonna be doing In the Loop on Tuesdays now with Reginald, John Lopez, and Figgy Fig. Still doing the hour, 11 p.m. to noon, but it looks like we're gonna start doing that on Tuesdays instead of Thursdays. And I'm excited about still being a part of the show, still having an opportunity to chop it up on the air. I'm actually happy about what it's done for my schedule, making it a little bit more regular and normal and definitive, if you will. So I want to welcome Reginald to the team, to the Sports Radio 610 team. I feel like I've done that already, but maybe just not on this podcast since it's been so long. So I want to do that and let y'all know that I'm excited about doing Tuesdays at 11 a.m. on In the Loop. Still excited about that. And of course, the Wednesdays on the Drive as well. Texans Report on the Drive with Sterner and Hughley, Clint Sterner and Ron Hughley, Tyler Milner producing that thing as usual. So those things happen. Those things I think are relevant as it pertains specifically to this podcast. We are shooting for a minimum of 3 times a week on the B Block podcast. I do now feel like I've got time to dedicate toward this and to focus on this. And so we're going to absolutely do that. Minimum 3 times a week here on the B Block podcast, looking at Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, but also breaking news as best as I can. If news breaks on a Tuesday and I go and I record and we do something, it is possible that we don't do something on Wednesday, so on and so forth. If it happens on a Thursday, maybe that's the episode you get and you don't get the Friday. So that's how it's going to kind of math out. That's the plan. Very little on the weekends. That's for both personal and professional reasons. But we are going to be pretty heavy on weekdays. And if weekends absolutely call for me to be on, I will try to make that happen. But there will be a concerted effort to not do as much on the weekends. There will also be some shorter episodes on the B Block. These are really designed for YouTube. And again, make sure you are subscribed to the YouTube page if you are not already. But these are going to be really designed specifically for YouTube. But I'm also going to put those episodes up on the podcast feed as well, just because I don't think that it hurts at all to do so. The more content, the better. But don't be surprised if you get those, if you're an audio listener and you get those and they feel like they might be more suited for video. I'll be mindful of that as I do them, since I know I'm going to be putting them up on the audio only feed. So yeah, man, those are the major ones. I would say. I would also say before I get out of here that the podcast, the B Block podcast, is going to be Houston sports. Obviously Houston sports focused, but we'll go outside of that as much and as often as I see fit. So if you only care about what I've got to say about local sports, Houston area sports, there's going to be plenty of that, but there will also be more. I'm a news person, I'm a journalist, so I'm going to want to tackle some interesting stories, or at least the ones that I find interesting, even if they are not necessarily under that Houston sports umbrella. At some point, I also plan on incorporating some of my Houston Chronicle colleagues as guests now that I have that connection. Now, I'm not promising that yet. That's just something that I feel comfortable at least saying that I want to do, saying that out loud and trying to hold myself accountable to pursuing that. And we'll see what happens with it. But that is something to put a pin in, of course. I'm trying to think anything else about this podcast that I want to get out there. I feel like that's mostly it. We've already gone about 45 minutes, which is way more than I think what the plan was today. So for now, make sure you are subscribed to the B Block Podcast, wherever it is that you get your podcasts, and make sure that you are subscribed to the YouTube page, because that is also important. We will be doing episodes on our YouTube, and we want you to be a part of it. I am Brandon Scott. I am your host of the B Block Podcast. It's been real. Until next time, y'all be good.